Hey there, everybody, and welcome to the Friday Hangout, where we start off usually around 11-ish live on the FridayHangout.com. This is the show every Friday, 11 a.m. Pacific, where we talk about the digital marketing and advertising and social media things that are out there in the world this week that we find interesting, and we talk to the people that we find equally interesting and fascinating. And this week, we have a few of my cohorts that I'll introduce in just one second. But we have somebody that I'm very happy to have on because he's been joining us on the show, sort of on the sidelines, chatting with us, and always has great questions. And he's actually got equally as much to say as some of our guests in the past. And I think we've got an awesome conversation. Lou Covey, how are you doing, man?
Hi there.
Uh,
I'm glad it's Friday.
yeah, no kidding, no kidding. I'm gonna pose a question to you in a moment, Lou, when I loop back, because I want to know what foot washer the foot washer media name. I want to know where that came from, just as we kick things off. No pun intended. But
Okay.
I want to introduce my cohorts. Janet Fouts, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And
You're doing-
TGIF.
She smiles while she says it, so she means most of that. And then Steve, how are you doing, Steve Farnsworth?
I'm absolutely doing delightful. Thank you for asking, Adam.
And I had the benefit of actually seeing these guys. We live close by, but we are all sort of I don't want to say busy because that's a little bit pretentious, but we are busy and
We don't see each other enough in real life.
exactly. And so we had an awesome time seeing each other in real life at a recent book signing for a friend, Brian Kramer, and then having some dinner and chat and shop and all that sort of thing. So
Hanging out with the South Bay social media mafia.
something like that. So Lou,
Yeah.
our conversation today is about advertising as a conversation, or advertising is a conversation. And what kicked this whole thing off was you and I had coffee on Monday, and we just were just talking. We were just talking about thoughts and things, and doing thoughtful guy things, that sort of stuff. And you brought up some really interesting things that I'm not going to dive into because I want to know what Foot Washer Media is and how you came up with that name so long ago first.
Okay. Well, I'm kind of a history buff, and the service of foot washing is really the oldest form of service known to man. It's something you basically did when somebody came into your house. You had somebody wash their feet because they wore sandals and you got your feet dirty. So that was one of the most basic forms of service that could be done, and it was done by anyone. And a piece of scripture that really affected my life was John 12, when it talks about how Jesus put aside everything that was his authority and washed the disciples' feet at the Last Supper. And that's the essence of what Foot Washer Media is all about. We're here to provide a service, to put aside our own egos and to be able to help people become what they need to be today.
Awesome. I had a feeling it had something to do with that because we've been connected for some time, and I gleaned that from my interactions with you. And you've got a background in, I mean, you were a journalist, correct? A journalism background. And correct me if I'm wrong, but you were doing some corporate communications. Were you doing things related to PR as well?
Public relations, marketing communications, technical writing, pretty much. So somebody else wants to ask me how many areas that I've actually written about in my life, and I said it's probably easier to ask me how many I haven't.
And with that said, I mean, you are pretty open about the fact that you have embraced social media and embraced digital marketing. We sort of frequently talk about folks or have chatted on the side about folks who have a hard time after being in an industry for so long embracing the new or embracing the way it is now. With that said, so you don't have a problem with that, and in fact, I think you are usually trying to bridge the gap between what you've been done for a while for other folks and helping them come into this newer world here of communications. And so that brings us to today with this topic of advertising as a conversation. And one of the things you said that sort of sparked this off was you said advertising is a conversation. I mean, basically anything around now, not just advertising, but communications, advertising, all this stuff that we're doing here as marketers and PR professionals and communication professionals is a conversation. And you even just brought your first example was like a Facebook ad. If an ad comes up on Facebook, although we don't see it as a conversation, as a consumer, we should be thinking of it as a conversation and as the advertiser, right?
Right. I mean, Facebook is a great example of this, and a lot of users don't realize. They complain about all the ads that keep pushed it to them, but they don't realize that there's a little button up in the corner, upper right-hand corner, that you can click on, and it'll give you an opportunity to say what you think about this ad. And the more you do that, the more focused you get as far as the advertising you get. So right now, my advertising feed, there's pretty much nothing on there that I am not interested in. And every once in a while, I'll clean it out. But they need that feedback, that conversation back and forth. And I think the example that I was given to you was the example between Ford and GM. Back just before the IPO for Facebook, GM decided to pull its millions of dollars of advertising spend on Facebook because they weren't getting any results from it. And when they did that, Ford Motor stepped up and said, we'll take all that. They doubled down on their advertising. And the reason is that when GM decided to put up an ad on Facebook, essentially said, buy a GM car. That was it. But when Ford put up an ad, they said things like, have you checked your tire pressure recently? And with no branding to it whatsoever. And you click on that, and it'll take you to a page that's also not branded, talking about the importance of having proper tire pressure. And with a statement that says, do you know that a lot of car manufacturers actually put sensors now in the new cars? Would you like to know more about that? Click on that, and now you go to a Ford page where it talks about the sensors that they put into their wheels. Would you like to know about how you can get this kind of technology? And then it takes to a page about buying a Ford product. And they made bank on this product, on this type of advertising. What they did is they asked questions and they got responses back and forth. It was a conversation. And
I'm sorry, go ahead, Lou.
No, that's essentially it. I mean, I was going to mention, have you ever heard of the thing called the Clue Train Manifesto?
Yes, yes.
Okay, there was a phrase in there that knocked me over 10 years ago when I first found it. And it said, the market is a conversation. You can participate in it, or you can ignore it, but you cannot control it. And that's where most marketers have the problem with the idea of conversation. They have to control it. They have to control the message, and it doesn't work anymore.
They don't have to. They want to.
Yeah.
I think the Clue Train is great. I have to say my favorite essay, though, is the Doc Searles one in that, and it just talks about the change of going from a weekly market where people talk to the people who made the things to the Industrial Revolution, which really separated buyers and producers, and then kind of how the Internet has brought that back all the way around where people can have conversations with the people who make stuff, and that's what they prefer to do.
Yeah.
I was actually really struck by what you said, because it made me think very seriously that that either you've been influenced or you just strongly think alike Howard Gossage.
Tell you the truth, I've never heard of him.
Oh, Howard Gossage is he's an old ad guy, and he's famous for saying, nobody reads ads. People read what what interests them, and sometimes it's an ad. And I think that really gets down to exactly what you're saying, is that when when we create things kind of from inside out, we go, hey, I have this great whatever, and that's not what people want to hear. They want to hear what's relevant to them, and and it's hard. For some reason, it's almost impossible between the lack of wherewithal from marketers to stop and succumbing to bosses who say, here, go out and tell our story on this organ, on this platform.
One of my earlier influencers was somebody that we were supposed to study back in journalism school, and it was a guy named why is it not coming to me?
Gosh, I hate it when that happens.
Yeah. His book was "The Medium is the Message."
Oh, great! Now we're all going to do it.
Oh, and
That's
the
what
worst
happens
part
when you
is
get
it's
gray
a
hair.
really famous person too.
Yeah, but it was essentially a concept that was developed in the 50s and 60s from this guy who was studying how media affected society. And what he discovered is that
Marshall
it didn't
McLuhan.
matter what you said because the audience would adapt to the message. In other words, all you do is just keep punching out the message, and eventually people would take it. Yeah, Marshall McLuhan, thank you. They'd eventually just take the message as truth. And it worked because there were just a very few groups of corporations and people that actually controlled all media. And so you had 3 television stations to work from, you had a handful of newspapers, and most of them were owned by the same corporations. So you buy the ads, you put it through there, and that's how it worked. But the problem was, in the 21st century, we've got this thing called social media, which allowed people to program their own television stations with their Rokus. They could publish their own books with Amazon. They could program their own radio stations with iHeart. And you didn't have to sit there and listen to the messages. You could just zip right through them. And so they have the opportunity now to ignore those messages better than ever they have been able to before. And
so they need to interest them and engage them, right?
Exactly. And because they're the ones that are actually creating your message now.
Well,
they're out there saying, this guy sucks, this guy's good.
Yeah, and the ones that we think are good are the ones that actually engage us past having a good message and delivering it in maybe it's a great message delivered in a really cool way.
Yeah, Shell Israel is calling it trust, and that trust is the new currency in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm.
It brings to mind things like, for instance, YouTube. You've got a lot of these pre-roll advertisements, right? I can't tell you how many times, like, I don't want to see a 30-second commercial 99% of the time if I'm watching TV, and in fact, I don't get to see commercials very much nowadays unless it's on Hulu or something like that, because I'm not usually watching terrestrial TV at the moment. But when terrestrial, I don't know what traditional, real, old school TV. Terrestrial radio is what they used to call radio. I don't know if they call it terrestrial TV as well. But but YouTube, you've got folks that have 1.5, 2-minute commercials that are on there that are pre-rolls. But what makes those interesting, well, and not all of them are something I'd like to watch, but I find myself probably 50%, 60% of the time watching them all the way through before potentially watching a video that is shorter, maybe than the video that I actually am watching, than the commercial. Yeah. And that usually is because of the packaging of that message, the way that it's delivered, and turning it into a story, turning it into an actual almost mini documentary or movie beforehand, but something that's engaging. And then at that, I also have the opportunity there to say if I don't like it, right, or to provide feedback, or to move on to the next step and click on that particular video and pursue it further and down the pipe, whether it's a website or a landing page or something like that they've got going on. But that's quite different than how it's been in advertising for decades now, right?
Yeah, it's where the advertising industry is falling down, because we hear these stories about how people are so upset about how the advertising isn't given the results. And Mary Meeker just did a report a couple of weeks ago about how the media is just taking it in the shorts with the lack of the loss of revenue in advertising, because they're not seeing the results that they expected from mobile advertising. And it's basically because they're not delivering the advertisers themselves are not delivering a compelling story. They're compelling the same old stuff they've always done. I've got a partner called MeBox Media. It's a video platform that actually allows interactivity, and the CEO was telling me is that where they find results in what they do is when someone's telling an engaging story, and secondly, an authentic story, so that they bring people in, but as people are reading the story, they tend to agree with it. They know it doesn't feel like hype to them. And then number three, providing the opportunity to engage, to say something back. And when you have those three things, you see enormous response from the audience. I did a program just for a little tire shop in Half Moon Bay, and all we used was Facebook. And we used the same concept that we did that Ford Motor did. I just said, don't tell people to come get your repairs, and don't tell them about the specials you've got at the shop. Give them stories about how to maintain their car. And within 3 months, his sales increased 600%.
People like to be educated. They like to learn things. They like to be entertained.
Yes.
And we can do that instead of obviously selling them. And that, that's the hardest sell we have with all of our clients.
Yeah.
I've never been in a client conversation where somebody didn't say, but we have to put the marketing message in every other message at the very least.
Yeah.
Like,
and, a lot of it depends on who it is you're involved with. Like, we had a client that brought us in to develop content. We did about 80 pieces of content in 9 months. And we were put under the management of the IT department, which was given a goal of increasing the number of clicks. Well, the thing is, we didn't increase the number of clicks. All we did is bring in 4,500 new customers that spent an average of $2,000 a piece.
mm-hmm.
Brought in $90 million in revenue directly related to the content that we provided that had nothing to do with their product and services. And they fired us because the IT guy said, we have to get more clicks. We don't care about sales.
Yeah, when they put you in under the IT department, because it's computers and all that.
Yeah.
It's like, no.
What were the clicks supposed to drive, if not sales, or not that was?
There was no connection between the interaction of the website to the sales department. Now, the thing is, the marketing and sales people got up in arms when they fired us, but nobody was willing to give up any part of their budget for that. They just essentially stole the budget from the IT department, and they were pissed off about that. Yeah. So what it comes down to, well, I'll give you another story. I approached the executive vice president of marketing for a major technology company. I was going up the ladder because we kept finding people that said, we can't make that decision. And I got to this guy who is second to the CEO. And I told him the concept of what we do. And he said, I don't have the authority to approve that. Okay, it had to be from the CEO, who had no interest in what was going on in marketing and sales. Absolutely none, because he was a technologist. And the problem is that most of the switchover that needs to be done has to be made at the very top. They have to engage. They have to understand that what was in the 20th century is no longer true in the 21st.
Well,
that's a tough sell.
So with that said, how do we do that? I mean, that's right. I mean, it's the head that has to think differently. Coincidentally, that's where the brain is, right? And I mean, that's why medium-sized companies many times can be more accessible, because there's a little bit less of that that's sort of spread across multiple executives or departments or leaders. But how do we overcome that? Wait for them to sort of wither and fall off the line, or what?
We have to attack. I mean, that's the bottom line. I started changing my views in 2000. There was an interview in a major B2B technology publication with 3 CEOs of big technology corporations in a particular industry niche. And they said, we've decided that we're tired of carrying the rest of the industry on our advertising budget. So we have decided, the 3 of us, together, in collusion, to cut our advertising budgets, to reduce the size of the publications, so there won't be enough space for those smaller companies that have been riding on our coattails and just doing PR and not advertising.
Wow.
And I started telling people, this is a bad idea because you're going to kill your media. And nobody would listen to me. They said I was crazy. They said the media would continue on. And then Web 2.0 hit, making it possible for people to make their own websites and to bypass the media. And so it started getting less and less and less. I think we lost, if my numbers were 90% of the B2B technology press was lost in the course of 3 years. So that's when I switched around. Then I started trying this thing called blogging in 2006.
I've heard of that before. I've heard of blogging
with it ever since, and I've been beating people over the heads about how to change things since about 2003. And it was last year at a trade show that a major executive came up to me and said, you know what, Lou, you've been about 10 years ahead of the rest of us all this time. And I said, well, great, are you going to give me a contract? No, we don't have the budget right now. I mean, same thing every time, but it's been a process of changing the paradigm and changing people's minds. And it's not an easy thing to do, but it's something that has to be done. It's what you have to do when you've dedicated yourself to service.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how we construct a proposal, for example. If you're going to approach somebody and say, okay, we want to do your ads, and we understand what your company is, and I don't know, let's say it's shoes. How do we build the concept and go in and talk to them and teach them about how this conversation occurs?
And I know Lou does that often, actually. Lou, having had conversations with Lou, I know that he does this often, which is a big part of his process. So Lou, what do you say to that?
Well, part of it is that you have to really tear back the process to the very bare bones, because even advertising is way at the far end of the process, because advertising doesn't work like we think it does anymore. Back in the 20th century, yeah, it worked fine about throwing out the messages, but advertising mostly justifies a decision somebody's already made. Okay, they've already decided to buy this thing, or they have bought it, and this makes them feel better about that decision. It's the process before it's actually, and it's not creating messages. That's the big problem I have to get across to people, is that it starts with a strategy of finding out what your people want, what your customers want. And most people don't know. There are entire industries that have no idea what they want. And I think there was a study that came out from Content Marketing Institute that said 90% of marketers have no idea what their customers actually want. That's the beginning. You have to show them that they don't know what they want, that they don't know what their customers want, and then start bringing them through the process of figuring that out by having a conversation. But from a strictly business standpoint, one of the things I've discovered that's helpful is that I don't go for long-term contracts. I mean, that used to be the thing for all PR and media and all together, is that they're looking for long-term contracts. And the idea is that I say, look, I want to find out if you're somebody I want to work with. Because when I had my PR business and I decided to make this change, I literally fired every client I had that would not accept how things were changed. It made a huge impact on my business, but I couldn't ethically go forward to doing things that I knew were no longer working.
So Lou, I wanna sort of bring things home with, beyond the previous example. Can you give us maybe one or two other folks that you think out there that are doing a great job of having conversation with their communications, their marketing, their advertising, any of those things?
Yeah. What's the name of them? Not Texas Instruments. They're doing a lousy job. There's a company in Texas, National Instruments. National Instruments is doing an outstanding job. They've actually approached me a couple of times, and I taken a look at their program, and I said, no, there's nothing I can do for you. You're doing it right. Just keep moving forward. Another company.
And how are they doing it right? Why?
Because they're having a conversation. They don't go to trade shows where everything is canned. They have their own events, and they spend time talking with people. Okay, they're customers. They've created communities. Everybody wants to have a community. So they buy all this technology to make it, but that just because you bought the technology to make a community doesn't mean that you are actually building a community. Texas Instruments actually does that.
It's the hard skills and soft skills thing, right? A lot of times people are just like, yep, we bought that infrastructure and we put that thing in place and we're using social media, but they're not properly layering the soft skills or thoughtfulness or empathy or whatever other thing that you think falls in that bucket on top of it to really follow through with that.
Yeah. Another good example of doing it right is South by Southwest. Now, I've never gone to this thing, okay? Simply because I hate crowds, and this place is really crowded. But South by Southwest is not a trade show, okay? It's a music festival that technology companies go to help support. And what they do, they bring people in with something that interests them, and then they ask them questions. And I heard of Microsoft used to be a marketing giant in the 20th century, and they really screwed up in the 21st. But they're starting to get it, and they actually went to South by Southwest this year, and somebody actually told me what they did. They got this big wall, and they just invited people to start doing graffiti on things that they would like to see in technology. And they never identified themselves as who they were unless somebody came up and asked them. And they said, well, with Microsoft, well, what are you trying to sell? We're not trying to sell anything. We're trying to find out what you want. And so they had all this graffiti about where they wanted technology to go. And they took all that information back.
The
head of a major media company was telling me that he went and met with these guys. And they said, well, we really like what you're doing with your trade shows for the most part, but they're still kind of trade showy, and we would like to engage with you, but we don't want to do it the way you've been doing it. And so he said, well, what's your budget? And he says, well, our budget is kind of infinite because we need to find out how to do things right, so we're just investing what we need to. Microsoft, amazingly enough, has finally got it. After years of trying to stop social media from bothering people, especially people in the executive management, they've gotten rid of that executive management and now have opened up their marketing to start listening. And I actually anticipate Microsoft is going to be turning it around pretty soon.
God.
Did you just say that, Janet?
We had a very similar experience at the Cisco Live conference in that, you were talking a little earlier about how marketers don't necessarily know their market. They don't know who they are. And, I walk people through building buyer personas and market personas. And Cisco actually did that for something like 50 different demographics that were coming to the show to make sure that when people got there they were seeing what they wanted to see, that there were courses there that they could fit into, that some fit into the hackathon. They really customized the experience, and it's very clear that with the Internet of Everything that they're really looking for ways to gain a lot more information. And they did have places as well that you could just tell them, what do you want to see? What do you want to see different? They had this girl walking around in a cardboard box like a voting booth, and she was handing out Post-its, and people wrote on it what they wanted to see at the conference, and then they stuck it on the outside of the booth. So they were doing a similar thing. I don't know which came first, but still, it's a good idea to get real feedback.
Yeah, and that's the value of any real trade show, is you've got people there they're going to share stuff with you.
As long as you give them a lightsaber.
Yeah.
which is, yeah. I came home with a bevy of swords, a collection of different swords from people at that Cisco event. Um, so, Lou, I think, rather than go on to our usual tail end segment of sharing things that are going on, unless Janet, do you have something particular that you
Well,
want
I
to
actually
share?
did kind of want to talk about Twitter adding the website tag. I don't know if you guys have read about this already.
To do the
Um,
retargeting via Twitter
yeah,
advertising?
yeah. So if you're doing ads on Twitter, you can actually add a tag to your website, and then you'll be able to remarket to people who have been to your website, which is pretty interesting.
Okay.
Instead of doing it through a company, which normally you have to do to get that cookie through there.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Were there companies that supported Twitter's
Well, Admiral does.
supports Twitter as well?
Yeah.
And so you can do Twitter advertising and connect it somehow to AdRoll to be able to have the data to remarket back to folks.
But you don't have to use AdRoll. You can do it yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So I checked that out a little bit, and in the past they've had tags to allow you to understand your conversion and activity as it relates to your website, but never to sort of tag with that cookie and let's keep with the times here, or with the conversation here, to continue the conversation beyond somebody connecting with you, on your site, or just coming and visiting your site. And so how it works, if you want to explain how it works at all, Janet, just for those that don't understand the
It's
remarketing thing.
basically a little snippet of code that you put on your website, and when somebody goes to your website, they pick up that I think it's cookie based, but I'm not.
It's usually a cookie, yeah, yeah.
But then when they go to Twitter and they see one of your updates, if they click on that update and go back to the website, or you're running ads that are targeted around a specific topic, and they're going to see that ad because they were at your website. So it's a way to, it's the same as any other retargeting, really. But it's a way to re-engage them. If they were on your blog and they saw something they liked and now they've forgotten about you, that ad's going to pop up and remind them. And hopefully that ad's going to be connected enough with the content that they saw in the original version so that they're actually going to care about coming back.
And I wonder how much you can segment it, right? So it really makes sense if you had the opportunity to create these remarketed ads that are very specific and relevant and segmented. You could go in there and say somebody went to your blog. So let's just say somebody went to your blog and you want to sort of usually people don't want to spend advertising dollars on sort of driving people back to something like that unless there's a reason why. But that the particular category of the blog and the topic behind your blog, you can focus your remarketing efforts on promoting a tweet back to those individuals that's very much tied to that particular content, versus just somebody's come to your website and you don't really understand more than that, right? That they've shown up on some page on your site. Let's just go ahead and try to find something relevant to share with them. You should be able to create a bevy of tweets, promoted tweets, that target individuals that have done certain things, primarily being in certain places on your site, and then reach out to them with very focused, relevant interactions based on that. For instance, do you offer webinars? And then do you also offer training services? And then and are those on various topics per se? What can you do to maybe remarket a free webinar or something like that to somebody who's come and maybe looked at your webinar page but didn't actually convert into an actual customer or something like that?
Well,
it's a simplified
hopefully
thing.
Twitter's listening to what you're saying, because they don't have targeting down very well yet. And really, you can target the website, but not specific content on the website. So, unless your website's very focused, it's a very niche website, it could be really off. And it really, the other thing is that Twitter targeting still isn't great. It's good. It's better than it used to be. It's better than Google, I think, but it's not as good as Facebook. So there's a lot still to be done in those ads, and it's fairly expensive.
Do you, Lou, for the sake of the conversation thing, I mean, is there any ideas that come to mind when it comes to how to leverage? I'm not sure how familiar you are with remarketing or anything like that, but remarketing somebody on on a display ad across Google's display network is very, very different than, say, remarketing somebody directly on Twitter, where the mental mode of somebody, the conversations they're having, why they're on Twitter is quite different than them sort of browsing the web and seeing an ad for the 15th time show up advertising something to you that you didn't buy a week ago. Any ideas that pop up in regards to how somebody might continue the conversation with something like that, Lou?
A lot of it has to do with being able to draw people in to that conversation. I mean, just putting out the same message again. I've seen this too many times. People put out the same message again and again, and it didn't resonate with somebody before. So why do you think it's going to resonate somewhere else? That's not necessarily true. You need to have some, it's like I said before, you've got to have something to actually engage them and get them to give you feedback. Because once they give you feedback, it's going to start changing how they look at things. Mm-hmm. Go back to MeBox. MeBox is going to be launching a new platform in the next couple of weeks, which they're able to actually identify down to a 9-digit zip code what people who is watching a particular video. And if you actually have their email list into your platform, into the platform, you can actually find out exactly who it is. And the thing is, you can tell by the links that they click on within the video what they're mostly interested in. So you can go back and you can rejigger the video according to those interests. And then using that's how you end up remarketing your stuff, because you change your message in the process.
From listening, I like that.
I feel a hole in my heart since Steve fell off the grid here, I guess, with his connection. I know that he'd have a lot to respond to with this as well. But Lou, I mean, I think it's not like it's completely foreign to me, but there were some things that we talked about over coffee, some things that you brought up again here that really made me think a little bit differently on how to articulate this, even when I'm talking with folks about it. And so I appreciate you sharing, your thoughts. And my interactions with you have always been really, really awesome. I think there's far and few between our folks that have your set of experience and let's say maturity, and then I wasn't going to say anything. But
I've earned them.
But at the same time, really get it with a foot in both worlds. Both sort of having a clear understanding of where those folks who are still a little bit too fixated on the past, and then ultimately what are the possibilities currently, and real world possibilities. And your clients, you talked about a tire place, but I know that you've worked with and really understand how to deal with a lot of B2B type folks, some large companies, technology, all that sort of thing. And although it's not your niche, it is something that I've heard you have a very articulate understanding about. And so I really encourage folks to connect with Lou and just sort of have a conversation with him. I think he's far more interested in doing that than necessarily just say, hey, follow me and we'll check out all the stuff I share. Would that be true there, Lou?
Yeah, I like to hear from people. I will share stuff that will stir people up. That's how I learn.
And speaking of which, where can people find you or connect with you, Lou?
Everywhere. All you got to do is type my name in, Lou Covey, in a search engine, and you'll find me everywhere. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I have a blog called New Tech Press, which we talk about new technology. And there's Facebook. Probably the best place to go is to footwashermedia.com, because I have links to every social site right on the front page.
Awesome. And again, I encourage folks. There's a lot of times I'm meeting new people on the show. Folks that are part of Janet's connections or Steve's connections, or folks that I haven't had an opportunity to really meet. beyond sort of the interactions that we've had socially. And Lou and I connected. He lives in the Bay Area as well, Bay Area native. He connected with me on Facebook of all places through another friend, and we started a relationship there. He's a true blue guy or a green guy, depending on if you're watching the video here.
Hoops.
So, yeah. And Janet, where can people find you? And maybe Steve, if you help him out with his usual ending.
Find Steve at Steveology on Twitter or the Steveology blog, and you can find me at janetfouts.com or at jfouts on Twitter.
Oh man, Steve, she did you a good one there. All right, and I'm Adam Hellway. I'm Adam Secret Sushi, pretty much anywhere on Twitter. Secret Sushi, secretsushi.com is the site, and you guys can find us every single week here again at 11 a.m. Pacific. We usually try to start on time. We do our best, but of course, if you're listening to this right now, you may not be watching the live stream. You may, in fact, instead be watching the recording that's also on the YouTube channel where all of our videos are. So if you actually decide to see our faces and want to see our faces, that's where you can see the whole stream. And then we have all the audio. So the audio is on iHeartRadio. Yes, you can go to iHeartRadio, Spreaker.com, and then, of course, the good, trusty, dusty iTunes where you can subscribe to all the audio podcasts. We really, really would appreciate reviews on any of those platforms because for every 1,000 people that listen to the show, we usually get, in most cases, you end up getting 1 or 2 reviews if you're lucky, and just people always think that somebody else is going to review it or it's not a big deal, but it is a big deal. It helps us get discovered more and gives us some feedback. And shoot, for all we know, you might give us a crappy review and it'll let us know that we should just hang up the towel, just turn it all off, right, Janet? But
it happened.
What was that?
It's not going to happen. We're going to keep on going with it.
Yeah, screw you with your bad reviews. We're not going to do that. We're just going to keep
Lou. Lou's been a great audience at so many shows, so having his input has made a lot of our interviews better. And so the more people who comment and put in questions, the better.
Yeah. Actually, I forgot to say that, Lou. Thank you very much for helping be sort of our outside of the window conversationalist, because a lot of your questions have been very much that, very, very good catalysts to continued conversations during our previous episodes. So thank you.
Welcome.
All right. So hopefully here's to seeing you next Friday at 11 o'clock. I'm not sure who our guest is. We can say who our guest is. Who?
Jason Falls.
Jason Falls. Falls Off the Rocker. Social Media Explorer. Cafe Press. All kinds of great stuff. He's always a fun guest to have on. So please join us next week. And thank you guys again. Bye from the Friday Hangout.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.